After seeing 50,000 views on my Cardinal fixed gear video in a short time, and thank you to all who've watched it, today we have for you a 3-in-1 video. 1, it is the most detailed review of the Cardinal RG out there. 2, it shows upgrades to an older plane that makes it better than even a modern plane and for a fraction of the cost. And 3, you'll fly along with us for a 1,000-mile cross-country trip to see the performance and economy of the RG. Now it is a longer video, so we've tried our best to make it informative and enjoyable throughout.
Air 5 Victor, contact Rockford approach on 121.0.
121.0, 78905 Victor, good day.
Okay.
Rockford approach, Cardinal 78905 Victor, 6,500.
For approach, altimeter is 2984, radar contact, seat on course.
In this video, we're going to talk about the history of the Cardinal RG, take a look at the exterior, the engine, the interior, and the panel, which on this particular plane has actually been upgraded to a full Garmin glass panel. We're also going to take a look at that funny looking landing gear and take a look at how that works. And then we're going to discuss some specifications, performance, and some interesting modifications. And of course, we're going to do a comparison between the Cardinal fixed gear model and the retractable gear model, which is something I've wanted to do for a long time. And we're going to go in and we're going to compare it to two other popular model of retractable gear airplanes, the Piper Aero 200 and the Mooney M20C. Of course, we're also going to include our signature flight video from the startup, taxi, takeoff, climb, to the cruise on a cross-country flight at 10,000 feet, all the way down into our descent and landing. Now let me ask you, can a Cardinal RG fly around 180 knots with the same 200 horsepower engine that this one has? And could it fly up to 20,000 feet while burning only 10.8 gallons of fuel? Well, you know, a normal Cardinal RG can't do that, but there is one out there that's called the Cardinal Cruiser, and that one can actually give that impressive performance. I'm going to have a discussion about that a little bit later in the modification section. The Cardinal was Cessna's plane of the 70s. It was actually intended to keep all of the Skyhawk's good attributes while overcoming some of its disadvantages. Things like the updated cabin space and also having those round wheel struts that could absorb the shock in all directions. At that time, there was an obvious need also for a retractable gear fast airplane to compete with the Piper Aero and the Mooney models. During the 8-year lifespan of the Cardinal, there were 1,367 RGs built in the USA. There were also 176 built in France that were called the Reims F177 RG. This plane is for sale. You'll find the details in the description below. Most people agree that the Cessna Cardinal is probably one of the nicest looking planes that are out there. And one of the reasons, it's got this full cantilever wing. This wing design was started on the Cessna Centurions, the 210s, back in 1967. The dihedral on this wing is actually 1.5 degrees. So the initial fuel system on the Cardinal RG was a bit unusual design for Cessna. They had just the on and the off switch position. And that would occasionally cause some problems in flight, being that sometimes one tank will drain a little bit faster than the other. So in the 1973, they actually went in and they installed a left, both, right, and off positions for the selector. And then at the same time when they did that, they upgraded the tanks to the 61-gallon size when previously they were only 51 gallons. The flaps on Cessnas are some of the largest in the industry. This has 30-degree electrically operated flaps. So one of the nice things I like about it, if we take a look at it here, it's got notched connections, so that's 10 degrees. That's 20 degrees. And that's 30 degrees. You're easily able to set the flaps in flight, especially on landing, without even looking at the controls. So the Cessna Cardinal doors, they open 90 degrees. One of the things with that is that if it is a windy day like it is today, you could have an issue with it becoming like a sail and putting stress on the hinges here. So this actually has this door steward upgrade installed, which helps prevent that, keeping the door nice and steady. The rudder on the Cardinal is 8 feet 7 inches tall. The stabilator is actually 12 feet wide, and it's balanced out by having these slotted tabs up front and the anti-servo tab in the back. So the stabilizer is slotted here that has to ward off that airflow, that separation when you have a high angle of attack on here. And it actually has a lot of elevator authority with this large stabilizer. Especially during your landings, you really shouldn't make large control inputs with your pitch changes. If you take a look at it here, just how much of a pitch change there is, its entire surface is moving, so you got to be really careful on your landings not to overdo it. One of the mistakes that pilots actually can make when they're coming in from a 172 is handling the pitch like a 172, especially during your landing. It's not really the plane's fault because each plane is different and you just need to be flown the way that they're designed to fly. So if you're new to Cardinal and it bounces initially on landing, the best option is just to go around and not try to force it down. Up front here in the cowling, we've got upgraded LED landing and taxi lights. These are very beneficial because they have a very low current draw, so you can keep them on all the time if you want in flight. It helps with updated visibility for other aircraft to see you, and especially when landing and taxiing around on the ground at night, gives you a lot more visibility as well. So let's take a look at just how bright they are. The fixed gear of the Cardinal was first introduced in 1967, while the first RG model was built in 1971. And throughout the 8 years that the RG was in production, there's 4 different landing gear systems that they developed, finally setting in 1974 with the most improvement on this landing gear. Now, one of the things is that it's typically pretty difficult to engineer a fuselage-mounted landing gear system, and the competitors to the Cardinal RG are usually low wings where they've got the gear that just folds up and into the wing. It's a pretty simple design. So what they did is this system was actually initially developed for the Cessna 210 Centurion. This tubular design makes it compact enough and easy to be able to fold up and into the fuselage, so they were able to just make that design into it and then add the little hump in the baggage compartment where the wheels go. And these wheels are actually a smaller design than the fixed gear. They're 15 by 6, with low profile design in order to fit up into the wheel wells better. The Cardinal has an electric over hydraulic power pack that produces about 1500 psi for the gear operation. The emergency extension handle is in between the front seats, so both pilot and co-pilot can reach it easily from either seat, and you need to have about 40 pumps on that handle if the electric power pack were to fail. The landing gear retraction on this model takes about 12 seconds. The 1978 model, they upgraded to a 28-volt system, and an improved power pack, which actually gave it a factory gear retraction of only about 6 seconds. But with the design the way that it is, the wheels will drop down first and then fold up and back. So what I always like to do is make sure that I have a nice positive rate of climb and I am completely out of usable runway before I retract the gear, just because of that system. One of the pre-flights that you check on here is this switch right here, which is actually called a squat switch. And what this does is it prevents gear retraction on the ground. So you make sure that is clear before you take off. This is a steerable nose wheel, and when this retracts, you can see it's got a big cover here that folds back with it, and then 2 doors here that fold up, so the nose wheel is completely covered once it's retracted. Another one of those really nice updates that's available on this is these gear mirrors. So you can see that it's mounted just in one of the inspection plates, and there's one on either side. What I really love about this is that when you're in the left pilot seat, from this mirror you can see both the main gear and the nose gear. And then you look over to the other side and you can see the other main gear. So obviously looking out you can just see the main gear, but this allows you to see the nose gear in flight, and it's a very useful upgrade. It just gives you that added peace of mind to know that your gear is down and locked when you're in flight. Interesting story. I was actually flying a different plane and we had the gear warning light come on in flight. So I called up ATC, explained the situation. They got a hold of a local tower. I was able to do a low altitude flyby. They had 2 different people up there in the tower with binoculars checking to see if the gear looked down. Obviously they can't verify it's locked for me, but the gear was down. Ended up being a safe and happy landing. It ended up just being the warning switch that had faulted out during the flight. But with this type of setup, you don't have to worry about that. It's just a really nice peace of mind knowing that your gear is down by being able to look at it. The engine on the Cessna Cardinal RG is a 200 horsepower Lycoming IO360 A1B6D. It's a 4-cylinder horizontally opposed engine. The Lycoming O360 and IO360 series are very reliable engines, and always, if they're well maintained, you can usually run them well beyond TBO. There's a few things specific about this particular engine I want to point out to you before going into some of the generals. If we take a look at this particular engine, we can see that it has these nicer covers on the rockers. Now, I'm not sure they do anything except for to make it look a little bit nicer, but they are there. You can see here it has the GAMI fuel injectors on here, and this is very important for a couple of reasons. One is it balances out the fuel system, and the reason that that's important is because of the temperature. By having a balanced system, you can obviously run it a little bit leaner, and it keeps the temperatures cooler. Another thing about keeping it cooler is by taking a look at these baffling, you can see just how clean of condition these are. They're very tight, no leaks anywhere in there. That also helps with the cooling system quite a bit. Another point on the cooling system, if we take a look right here, is that the oil cooler actually has its own intake port to help cool the oil down much better than just having it sitting on a firewall. Along with the oil system, if we take a look back here, you can see that it actually does have the oil filter adapter installed, which is very good for keeping particles out of the engine better than just a screen system. And along in the back here, some of the other things, you can see the vacuum pump is a newer pump. Just underneath that, we've got the prop governor, and that is a little bit newer as well. And overall, very clean. It's got quite a bit of sensors throughout here, and the reason for those, most of them, is actually the JPI that's installed is a primary engine monitoring system, and we'll show that when we get to the panel. But if you see the space back here, there's two parts to that space. One is that when you're getting work done on it, it's much easier for the mechanic to work, which also reduces your labor cost involved in them having to work on the back panel pieces, as well as keeping it a little bit further away from the firewall, helping with the noise when you're in flight. One of the other points about the cooling is when the cowling is on, you'll see that there's very large openings here to let in a very high quantity of air to help with the cooling process. This particular engine never runs hot, even in the climb, considering all of the components that have been installed and the way that they've been installed. We've done oil analysis on this engine consecutively since we've gotten it, and they don't show any type of wear patterns or trends or anything like that. Compressions on this were actually 74, 74, 76, and 74, so really good compressions on all of the cylinders. This plane has a 2-blade McCulley propeller on it, and there is a 3-blade version that can be installed on here, but considering the cost of doing that versus the performance output of it, it's not something that I would really consider installing on this. Next, we're going to take a look at the panel on the Cardinal RG. If we take a look at it, you can see that it's been fully upgraded to a glass panel layout. It's a very expensive upgrade. It was a collaboration between Garmin and Sarasota Avionics, so everything was done to a high quality standard. It's actually, with all of the upgrades that are in here right now, it is qualified as a TAA, or Technically Advanced Aircraft. Starting over here, we've got our Garmin G500, which is our PFD, or Primary Flight Display. On the left-hand side here, we've got all of our gauges, which include wind, direction, and speed, true airspeed and ground speed, along with all of your primary gauges. And then on the right-hand side, you've got your moving map, and this also will display the traffic and the weather. This information is actually fed off of your primary GPS over here, which is your Garmin GTN 650 touchscreen GPS, and the only version up of this is the 750. On top of that, we've got a Garmin 345 ADS-B in and out transponder, which drives your traffic and gives you your weather data. And then our secondary Garmin Navcom is available here. To round out the center stack, we've got our Garmin GMA 350 audio panel, which has also got Bluetooth capability on here. And then up here, you can see that this is actually your primary engine monitor. It's a digital EDM 900 series engine monitor. It's got all 4 cylinder head temperatures, exhaust gas temperatures, your manifold pressure, RPM, oil temp, oil pressure, fuel flow, your fuel quantity indicators, both left and right. There's a lot of features to this one. It gives you your percentage horsepower in flight. You can run it very precisely on your fuel flow when you set it on here. It's just a very, very handy tool to have, and it's even got a plug-in so that you can actually take it in, and the mechanic can pull data off of that if you need to from anything that anomalies that popped up in flight. So this is extremely beneficial to have in the plane. Over here on the right hand side, you can see that we've got the display set up over here as kind of a secondary synthetic vision setup for the co-pilot to be able to fly from the right hand seat. It's very handy to have an electronic display like this available in the plane. You can keep your databases up to date on this and be able to use this as a nice layout to display your approach charts and everything like that, using an app like ForeFlight or other weather apps or anything like that, and that is connected into your 345 as well to display traffic and weather on here at the same time. Other standard stuff obviously includes the flap settings over here and all of your selectors and everything with your gear selector here, your trim options, your trim wheels, and then all of your switches for your lights. And then of course over here we've got an STEC 50 autopilot. This is a 2-axis autopilot with altitude hold. It was recently refurbished with STEC directly. So everything is set up on here. We've got GPSS roll steering for a nice smooth transition. It's got your heading option, your nav, VOR. Everything is all set up on here. It is connected into the GPS, so it'll fly your headings, and it's got the approach buttons and everything on there as well. So really nice to have that feature on the plane. And then over here we do have some backup gauges. Now obviously you can see that all of your lights are set up here for all of your electronic gauges, but what's really nice about this is that you actually have lights underneath here. We do have it set down so you can see it's got a nice bright setting for when you need to be able to see a little bit better. You can adjust the brightness from here, as well as flip it over to blue light for when you're in flight. That's a lot less strain on your eyes. You can switch it down to a lower setting as well. So it's got some nice little features like that built into it that you wouldn't normally notice. The panel of this particular plane is highly upgraded. This photo I found shows what the panel looked like before the upgrade. The Cardinal has a very large panel area. You can see the nicely organized 6-pack that's right in front of the pilot's seat, and just to the right of that are the VOR CDI indicators. I really like that the important gauges like the RPM and the manifold pressure are right in front of the pilot and easy to see. The center stack has a lot of space for all the avionics, and they put the gear lever and indicators in a very noticeable position. Overall, this is a very thoughtful, clean design that helps reduce the pilot workload. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the interior of the Cardinal RG. One of the very first things we have to point out is obviously the Cessna Cardinals and the space to them. If you take a look, there's no other plane in the GA market that has the ease of access that this one does. Door opens 90 degrees, means that you have direct access. The wheel is back in the back, so you can come right up and climb straight in. Once you're in, you've got plenty of options for where your seat is going to fit. You can go all the way forward for controls, sit a little bit back if you're taller, and then once the seat is forward, just take a look at how much space is back here for the legroom for your passengers. Again, super easy to get in, and lots of legroom for the passengers back here, lots of shoulder room. Talking about the space in this, we're not talking just about how easy it is to get in, but also about your headspace as well as the space you have shoulder to shoulder. So a couple of the measurements, if we take a look here, shoulder to shoulder, if we use this particular spot here, we're at 39 inches. And that is really close to what a 210 will give you. And then you've also got here your space to get around the gear, emergency gear here. It's actually, I know you can't see it over there, but it is actually at 45 inches for your space to give you enough space on your head. And the fact is that both of these seats have the adjustment feature so that when you're sitting in it, you can adjust the seats up and down. So if you're a little bit taller, drop the seat down a little bit. You've got a lot more headspace that way. If you're a little bit shorter, lift the seats back up, and that is for both the pilot and the co-pilot. We take a look at the space in the back seat here. If I pull this forward for you, see if you can take a look and see this. Shoulder space again, if we go here, shoulder to shoulder, for the back passengers, we're actually at 42 inches shoulder to shoulder. So you've got tons of space back here for your back passengers. And then your height, if you don't consider the gear hump that's in there, you're actually sitting at probably about 41 inches or so for your height for your headspace. So again, lots of space, lots of room for your passengers and for you as a pilot. You take a look at the rest of the overall interior. You can see the nice gray leather seats. These are in really nice condition overall. There's no real rips or anything like that on it. It's got 3-point harness system for the 2 front seats. You've got a 4-place intercom system. The carpet in here is brand new. If you take a look, it was specially form fitted for the RG model with the hump here for the gear, and it's a really nice dark gray complement to the rest of the interior. Just looking at all of the paneling and stuff, when they did the leather paneling on the seats, they also did on the paneling, so you can take a look. Everything is leather paneled out, and then the plastics are in pretty nice shape as well overall. You've got your airline vent styles back here for your rear passengers, and then also the headliner is a nice fabric, kind of a little bit more of a noise muffling option on there, so that's kind of a nice feature to have as well. Take a look at the baggage area. First thing we're going to notice is that it's got a much wider door than you find in the fixed gear Cardinals. It's got a little rod to hold it up and open. You can see that it's kind of split into a couple different areas with this permanent suitcase that's attached here, and actually that's where the gear folds it up and in the fuselage, so they have that hump built into there for that. But it gives you a separated area for your baggage. So you've got here 120 pounds that you can put in here. You've got a little baggage shelf that they use like a hat shelf that can put about 12 pounds. And then up front here between the seat and the permanent suitcase is an additional area to keep some more stuff. And you've got tons of space between the base and up to the top, so you can put a lot of things height-wise as well as front to back. So it gives you lots of different options for carrying luggage and other things in this plane. Let's take a look at the performance of the 1976 Cessna 177 RG. The Cardinal RG has a useful load of about 1,170 pounds. Since most RGs are upgraded, you're more likely to see a range of between 900 and 1,000 pounds. The fuel capacity is 61 gallons. It burns about 10 gallons per hour at 75% power, and the Cardinal RG has a very short takeoff, run, and landing roll, so you can operate on any short runway. The service ceiling is 17,100 feet, which is a very good ceiling for a larger cabin 200 horsepower single. In economy settings, the Cardinal RG can fly about 900 nautical miles and actually over 1,000 miles non-stop if it's pulled back to 6 or 7 gallons per hour. Let's compare the Cardinal RG to similar complex airplanes, the Mooney M20F and the Piper Aero 200. I've highlighted in green which airplane leads each category. The Mooney can climb and fly faster with a higher ceiling. The Cardinal RG has very close performance numbers to the Mooney F. The Cardinal can carry a higher payload for a longer range and has a lower stall speed. It also has the best cabin space and the lightest controls. As you can see, all three are very good airplanes. There are many important factors considered beyond the performance numbers of a plane when you're looking. I've also made a detailed video comparing the Cardinal RG to the fixed gear. You can find that video on our YouTube channel if you're interested. The Cardinal Cruiser is an upgrade of the Cardinal RG that gives some impressive performance and high altitude capabilities to the plane. There are many upgrades to the engine, including a turbo automatic wastegate and an intercooler, turning it into a turbo normalized plane. What that does is keep sea level power up to very high altitudes. Since the engine is not overboosting like a turbocharged engine, it actually keeps a low fuel burn and the longevity of the engine as well. I've never flown one, but based on the specs, the climb rate is actually 750 feet a minute, even at 20,000 feet, and at 17,500 feet, it should fly about 179 knots lean of peak. It's a very interesting plane. So on this cross-country trip, we're going to be flying to Cambridge, Minnesota, and then on to Fergus Falls, Minnesota, before coming back. The total distance is around 1,200 miles. The flight time is going to take just over 7 hours and 30 minutes, and it'll take about 72 gallons of fuel. If you leave in the morning, you'd be able to get back in the afternoon. The actual time and fuel burn would be a little less because we'll be able to file different altitudes for favorable winds for each leg. Let's go ahead and get the Cardinal RG started up now. So first thing we want to do, we want to make sure our fuel is on both. Open up our cowl flaps. Our mixture is going to be out. Prop needs to be in. The throttle just to about a quarter here. We've got our lights set up. So we're going to flip our master on, and then we're waiting for our JPI to activate here so that we can watch our fuel flow and fuel pressure. So once this gets up and running, we're going to put our fuel pump switch on. We're watching here, pushing in the mixture. We've got an active fuel flow. Give about 3 to 5 seconds, pull that back out, grab the key. For our longer trips, we like to make an early departure. We usually find some better weather, and it gives us plenty of time to complete the trip in the day. These very bright LED lights definitely help a lot for those early departures. The Cardinal only needs a short distance to take off, with 10 degrees of flaps, and I usually wait until the end of the runway to retract the gear. Some planes have a faster gear operating time, so you can retract them right after you get a positive rate of climb. The flaps are very effective on most Cessnas, so retracting the flaps changes the climb and the speed. So I usually wait to retract the flaps until about 700 to 1,000 feet AGL. Now here's an outside view of the takeoff during the daytime so that you can see it a little bit better. The climb rate of a Cardinal RG is just about 1,000 feet per minute when at sea level and full gross. You can see unique views like this during early morning flights. The mist settling in on the waterways and lakes looks like snow. The Cardinal has the best uninterrupted views. If you enjoy looking at scenery in flight, I cannot think of another plane that has better views. The large windows with no strut gives you uninterrupted views all the way around. Flying a full glass panel is like flying a modern plane. The Cirrus G2 Avidyne full glass cockpit doesn't even have the features this plane has. One great advantage of the Garmin G500 is that it actually has real-time winds aloft. You can fly faster and save fuel by knowing the wind direction and adjusting your altitude. Once you climb up to your cruise altitude, it's very easy to fly. We often fly without autopilot because once you trim it, you can fly pretty much hands-free. It's a very stable and predictable platform, and that's what makes all Cardinals great IFR platforms. The Cardinal RG doesn't have main gear doors. That creates some drag, especially in the climb with a higher angle of attack. The main gear doors are complex and somewhat troublesome, so Cessna had decided to remove them even though it came with a slight speed penalty, because the early Cessna 210s did have gear doors, but they removed them in the later models, and the Cardinal RG never had the gear doors to begin with. The Cardinal RG probably would have been just a slightly faster airplane with gear doors.
Niner 5 Victor, contact Rockford approach on 121.0.
121.0, 78905 Victor, good day.
Okay.
Flying across 4 states, you get to see some great views and watch the landscape and sky change right around you. My daughter always loves to help out during flights, and she's not quite tall enough yet to look over the panels, so she tends to fly on the instruments. And she's very precise when flying on instruments and claims that she's actually a better IFR pilot. It's just amazing what young people can do when you put them on the right path.
Autopilot is connected up to our navigator, which is our Garmin GTN 650 WAS GPS. And now it's going to be flying the magenta track, and we've actually got a 35-knot wind coming in from 245 degrees. So you can see on the indicator here.
No traffic is over between you and Burlington. Radar service terminated. Squawk VFR. Frequency change approved.
You can see on the indicator here, it's actually crabbed into the wind, but it's flying straight. It's going to stay on that magenta line by crabbing it that direction, and the autopilot does all those corrections. And then on top of that, you load an approach on the 650. It'll actually help you fly your approach. It has GPSS roll steering so that it's going to make your turns ahead of time so that you don't overshoot your turns, and then help you with your approaches. And all you have to do is disconnect the altitude and follow the altitude down into your approach.
Approaching Cambridge is actually sometimes a little bit tricky because of the tree line all the way around the field. It actually can create some small waves on final if the wind is strong enough. Although we've got enough fuel for the next leg, we did fill the tanks because the fuel price is a little bit better here. Let's take off from Cambridge and head out on the next leg of our journey. The Cardinal RG has a ceiling of 17,100 feet, so it can fly high, although very few pilots do fly that high in their Cardinals. Normally aspirated airplanes like this usually like to fly somewhere between 8 and 12,000 feet, although sometimes terrain or weather means that you've got to fly higher, and that's when we carry portable oxygen in the plane. The Cardinal RG is a well-balanced plane, so the controls are very light. It has a large cabin that also helps. When you have top-of-the-line avionics like this plane does, it makes the flight even easier. It has very good performance for a 200 horsepower single-engine airplane. I personally like the fuel economy. Over a 1,000-mile trip, you only need about 75 gallons of fuel, and if you were to run it on economy settings lean of peak, it would take even less fuel, but obviously take a little more time. Flying a 1,000-mile cross-country trip in a 177 RG can be done in a day during daylight hours. It may not be as comfortable as a cabin class pressurized plane, but honestly it is fairly comfortable. You can put the gear down anywhere below 125 knots, which will help you reduce your airspeed. So anytime you need to slow down the plane, or even in heavy turbulence, you just put the gear down, it'll help slow the plane. You can start adding flaps as necessary below 130 knots for the first notch, and then 95 knots for the other two. When you use full 30-degree flaps on the plane, you can land very slow touchdown speeds and use very short runways. Here you can see a full flap landing on the Cardinal. I did forget to use the proper ND filter in the camera, so no, it doesn't have a reverse propeller, even though it looks like it in the video. Thank you for watching our video. We'd appreciate if you take the time to like our video, subscribe to our channel for notification on future videos, and of course, any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the section below. We'll do our best to answer them.